My name's Miles Corbin, and for 35 years, I've been a detective. You spend that long wading through the muck of other people's lives, you learn to develop a thick skin. It's a requirement of the job, like the cheap coffee and the perpetual exhaustion. You see the worst of humanity, the things people are capable of doing to each other, for reasons as simple as greed or as complicated as love. And you learn to put it all into neat little boxes. Motive, means, opportunity. It's all just ugly arithmetic. You solve the equation, you file the report, and you move on to the next one. You have to. If you let even one of them really get under your skin, it'll burrow in like a tick and drain you dry. So you build a wall, brick by brick, with skepticism and cold logic. You tell yourself that there's an explanation for everything. That for every monster, there's a rational human reason for their monstrosity. You have to believe that, because the alternative is just too dark to consider. But my wall, the one I spent a lifetime building, has a crack in it. One case that defied math, one equation I could never solve, one ghost that doesn't rattle chains or whisper in the dark, but just sits there in the quiet moments, reminding me that all the logic in the world can't save a child. Her name was Lily, 10 years ago. A 7-year-old girl with bright red ribbons in her hair who vanished from her own backyard on a sunny afternoon. I've never forgotten the silence of that yard when we first arrived. The swing set swaying gently in a breeze that carried no laughter, the half-eaten apple left on the picnic blanket. We turned that town inside out. We interviewed every neighbor, every friend, every distant relative. We chased down every lead, no matter how thin, from the plausible to the outright bizarre. I personally walked every centimeter of the woods that border her house, my boots sinking into the damp earth, calling her name until my voice was raw. But it was like she'd been erased from the world. For weeks, I sat with her parents in their suffocatingly quiet living room, watching the hope in their eyes curdle into a kind of permanent, hollow grief. I watched them become ghosts in their own home, surrounded by the bright, colorful artifacts of a life that had been stolen from them. They looked at me with a desperate faith that I, the seasoned detective, the man with the badge and the answers, could fix the unfixable. And I failed them. Utterly. The case went cold, buried under the weight of the 1,000 other tragedies. But it never got buried for me. It became the defining failure of my life, the bedrock of my disillusionment. It's the reason I started taking the other cases, the ones the rest of the department laughed at, the supernatural files. Not because I suddenly started believing in ghouls and goblins, but because logic had failed me so profoundly with Lily, I couldn't afford to dismiss anything ever again. It was my penance, my quiet, desperate attempt to make sense of the one time nothing made sense at all. This brings me to the doll. I've never actually seen it, not with my own 2 eyes, but it lives in my head. It's the face I give my failure. In my mind, it's a porcelain doll, the kind you'd see in an antique shop, propped up on a dusty shelf. Its face is a spider web of fine cracks, the paint chipped away to show the grayish material underneath. One of its glass eyes is missing, leaving a dark, hollow socket that seems to suck in the light around it. The other stares blankly. Its painted-on cheerfulness, a grotesque parody of innocence. Its dress, once a sunny yellow, is tattered and stained with what my mind always supplies as a mixture of mud and grave dirt. It's a perfect symbol, isn't it? A doll is meant to be a child's companion, a silent keeper of secrets, a protector. But this one is broken, corrupted. It's a monument to a stolen childhood. It represents everything I was supposed to defend and everything I lost. The terror it holds for me isn't about a ghost in a toy. It's about the chilling, silent accusation that I stood by and let the darkness win. For 10 years, it's been a phantom, a nightmare I could mostly keep locked away. But lately, I've been getting the feeling that it's tired of living in my head. It wants to come out and play.
The first time it happened was on a Tuesday night. Rain was lashing against the windows of the precinct, the kind of miserable, persistent downpour that soaks deep into the city's bones. The office was empty, save for me and the low hum of the servers in the next room. I was neck deep in a new case, a 16-year-old runaway from a foster home. The details were just similar enough to Lily's file to be churning up old sludge in the back of my mind, and I was running on stale coffee and frustration. The air was thick with the smell of wet coats and old paper. I was staring at a photograph of the missing girl, trying to see something, anything, that the other detectives had missed, when I heard it, a faint scraping sound from the main hallway that ran the length of our floor. I paused, listening. It was probably just the ancient building settling, or maybe the janitor, but I knew he had already done his rounds. I dismissed it, turning my attention back to the file. Then the smell hit me. Faint but unmistakable. The scent of damp soil, cold and cloying, mixed with something vaguely sweet like wilting flowers on a grave. My head snapped up. The vents in this place were notorious for pulling in strange odors from the street, but this was different. This smelled like the earth in those woods where I'd searched for Lily. I pushed my chair back, the wheels groaning in the silence, and stood up. My joints ached, a constant reminder that I wasn't the young, tireless detective I used to be. I walked to the door of my office and looked down the long, shattered corridor. It was empty, illuminated only by the sickly green glow of the emergency exit signs at the far end. Nothing seemed out of place. I was about to turn back to chalk it up to an old man's overactive imagination, fueled by caffeine and morbid memories, when I saw it. For no more than a second, standing in the middle of the hallway, right where the shadows were deepest, was a small figure. It was indistinct, little more than a silhouette against the gloom, but it was unmistakably the shape of a child, or more accurately, a large doll. It was perfectly still. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My entire world narrowed to one dark shape. My heart wasn't racing, it was doing the opposite, beating with a slow, heavy, painful rhythm like a funeral drum. A fluorescent light overhead chose that exact moment to flicker, buzzing erratically. It blinked once, plunging the hallway into near total darkness for a split second. When the light came back on, the hallway was empty. It was just gone. My logical mind, my trusted shield, kicked into gear immediately. A trick of the light, a shadow. My eyes, strained from hours of reading, had played a prank on me. It was nothing. But the cold dread that had seeped into my marrow knew better. It knew that what I had seen was real, and it was just the beginning. I didn't call out, I didn't run for the light switch. Years of training kept my body moving, even when my mind was reeling. I walked, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the linoleum, down the entire length of the hallway. I ran my hand along the wall where the shape had been. The painted brick was cold, but one spot, right where it had stood, was like ice, a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the building's faulty heating. I checked every door I passed, the forensics lab, the interrogation rooms, the archives, all locked tight for the night. There was no one else on the floor, no way in, no way out. I stood there for a long time, at the far end of the hall, just staring back at my empty, brightly lit office, a small island of supposed sanity in an ocean of encroaching darkness. The smell of grave dirt was gone, replaced by the familiar scent of industrial cleaner. It was as if nothing had happened, but something had. I went back to my desk, gathered my things, and stuffed the case file into my briefcase, my hands moving on autopilot. I couldn't look at the missing girl's face anymore. The work was impossible now. The quiet dread that settled over me was a different kind of fear from a gun in my face or a cornered suspect. This was a fear that came from within. It was the terrifying, sinking realization that the lock on the cage where I kept my ghosts had just been broken. And the worst part was, I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that I was the one who had given it the key. I drove home that night through slick, empty streets, the city lights bleeding together into watercolor smears on my windshield. My apartment, usually a refuge of quiet order, felt different, unwelcoming. I'd lived in the same place for 20 years, a small second-floor walk-up filled with books and old case files. I knew every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the ancient plumbing. But that night, every familiar sound seemed alien, menacing. I double-checked the lock on my door, something I hadn't done in years, and left the chain on. Sleep didn't come. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying that fleeting image in the hallway. A trick of the light, it had to be. I was 57 years old, overworked and haunted by a ghost of my own making. Stress manifests in strange ways. The human brain is a notoriously unreliable narrator. I repeated these rationalizations like a mantra, a prayer to the god of logic I had served my whole life. But the cold spot on the wall, the smell of damp earth, those weren't so easy to dismiss. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen to make coffee, the last resort of the troubled. As the machine gurgled and hissed, I stood by the window, looking out at the rain-swept alley below. And then I heard it again. Not a scrape this time, but a soft, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the living room. My hand went instinctively to my side where my service weapon would normally be, but I was home and it was locked in its case in the bedroom. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron skillet, and crept towards the sound. The thumping stopped. Absolute silence descended on the apartment, a silence so profound it felt like a pressure against my eardrums. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and pushed the living room door open. The room was empty, exactly as I'd left it. The worn leather armchair, the overflowing bookshelves, the faint outline of the city through the large window. Nothing. Then my eyes fell on the floor in the center of the room. Lying there, on the worn patch of my Persian rug, was a single faded red ribbon.
I spent the next 2 days in a state of hypervigilant denial. I went to work, I drank the terrible coffee, I stared at the files on my desk. I told no one about what I had seen. Who would I tell? What would I say? That I saw a ghost doll in the hallway and found a ribbon from a 10-year-old cold case on my living room floor? They'd have me on psychiatric leave before the words were even out of my mouth. So, I did what I do best. I investigated. I started with the precinct. I pulled the security footage from Tuesday night. The cameras were old, the resolution grainy, but they worked. I sat in the dark video monitoring room for hours, fast-forwarding and rewinding, my eyes burning from the screen. The footage showed exactly what you'd expect. Me, working late, walking out into the hallway, standing there for a minute, and then walking back. The hallway was empty. There was no flicker of the lights, no dark shape, no silhouette. Nothing. It wasn't there. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I was losing my mind. It was a simple, terrifying, but ultimately rational explanation. I was cracking under the pressure. I could deal with that. I could see a therapist, take a vacation. I couldn't deal with the alternative. Feeling emboldened, I went back to my apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. The ribbon was the key. If I could explain the ribbon, I could explain everything. It had to have come from somewhere. Maybe it fell out of an old evidence box I'd brought home. I hadn't touched the Lily case files in years, but it was possible.
I tore my apartment apart. I went through every box in my closet, every stack of papers, every dusty corner of my life. I found old photographs, forgotten commendations, a lifetime of meticulously organized failure. But no box from the Lily case. The ribbon remained an anomaly, a single damning piece of evidence against my sanity. My investigation, my desperate attempt to rebuild the logical wall around my world, was leading me nowhere. All it did was make me more aware of the little things, the subtle disturbances that I had previously ignored. A sudden chill in a warm room, the faint, cloying scent of grave dirt that would hang in the air for a moment and then vanish, the distinct feeling of being watched when I was alone. I started to feel like a character in one of the crackpot paranormal cases I was supposed to be debunking. The skepticism that had been my armor was corroding from the inside out. My point of no return came on Friday night. I was driving home from another long, fruitless day, my mind a tangled mess of denial and creeping dread. I decided on a whim to take a different route. A long, winding road that led past the old wooded park on the edge of town, the same woods where we had searched for Lily. I told myself I just wanted a change of scenery, but I knew I was lying. I was being pulled there. I parked the car by the side of the road, the engine ticking as it cooled. The woods were dark and silent under a moonless sky. I got out of the car, the night air cold on my face. A sense of profound wrongness settled over me. This was a mistake. I should get back in the car and drive away. But my feet felt rooted to the spot. I looked toward the tree line, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a silhouette this time. It was there, clear as day, standing just inside the woods, partially hidden behind the trunk of a large oak tree. The doll. It was exactly as I had imagined it for a decade. A perfect, horrifying manifestation of my deepest fears. The cracked porcelain of its face seemed to glow with a faint, sickly luminescence. Its tattered yellow dress was stained and dark, clinging to its small frame. Its one good glass eye caught the distant city lights, reflecting them back at me with a cold, dead intelligence. And in its small, porcelain hand, it was holding another red ribbon.
For a moment that stretched into an eternity, I was paralyzed. My entire career, my entire belief system was built on the foundation that things like this didn't happen. Monsters were human, ghosts were grief. But the thing standing in the woods defied every rational explanation. The cold dread from the precinct hallway returned, but this time it was a tidal wave, crashing over me, stealing the air from my lungs. The doll didn't move. It just stood there, a silent, mocking sentinel at the edge of the darkness. Then, slowly, it raised its other hand and pointed, not at me, but deeper into the woods. A silent invitation, an order, and a sound began to echo from the trees, a sound that chilled me more than the sight of the doll itself. It was the faint, tinkling music of a child's music box, playing a slow, off-key lullaby. It was the same lullaby that had played from the mobile above Lily's crib. Her parents had told me. My training, my instincts, everything screamed at me to get back in the car, to drive away and never look back. But I couldn't. The guilt I had carried for 10 years was a chain, and this thing, this doll, held the other end. It was showing me something, a clue, a chance after all this time to finally know what happened to her, to fix my failure. It was a lie, a beautiful, tempting lie, and I walked right into it. I pushed through the tangled undergrowth, the branches clawing at my coat, my eyes fixed on the doll. It remained just ahead, always slightly out of reach, leading me deeper and deeper into the suffocating darkness of the woods. The music box melody grew louder, more distorted, the cheerful notes twisting into something sorrowful and menacing. The doll led me to a small, forgotten clearing. In the center was a shallow depression in the earth, barely visible beneath a decade of fallen leaves. The music stopped. The woods fell silent. The doll was gone. I was alone. But I knew, with a sick certainty, what this place was. This was where Lily had ended up. This was her grave. My failure was no longer an abstract concept. It was the cold, damp earth beneath my feet. I fell to my knees, the grief and guilt of 10 years finally breaking through my carefully constructed walls. I had failed her. I had failed her parents. I had failed everything I was supposed to be. And in that moment of absolute despair, the trap sprang. The world around me dissolved. The trees, the clearing, the night sky, it all melted away into a thick, suffocating blackness. I wasn't in the woods anymore. I was somewhere else. A void, a place of absolute silence and cold, and I was not alone. The doll was there, but it was different now. It was no longer a small, static figure. It grew, its porcelain limbs stretching and cracking, its form twisting into a grotesque caricature of a human child. Its one good eye burned with a cold, ancient malice. The empty socket was a swirling vortex of blackness, and from it I could hear whispers, the echoes of a child's pain, her fear, her rage at being abandoned and not being saved. It was the spirit that wore the doll, and it was feeding on my despair. It showed me images, not illusions, but memories, my own failures, played back in excruciating detail. I saw Lily's parents, their faces etched with a grief I couldn't heal. I saw every cold case file, every victim I couldn't save, every family I couldn't give closure to. It was a symphony of my professional and personal inadequacies. The entity wasn't just the reminder of my failure with Lily. It was the embodiment of all my failures. It was a mirror reflecting the deepest, most secret fear of every detective. That in the end, we don't make a difference at all. That the darkness always wins. I tried to fight back, to cling for logic, to reason. I scrambled backwards trying to find the edge of this void, an escape. But there was no escape. The void was me. It was the emptiness I had carried inside me for a decade. The doll, the spirit, it hadn't created this place. It had just opened the door. It reached for me, its cracked porcelain fingers extending, not to touch me, but to pass through me. As it did, I felt a coldness that was not of this world. It wasn't a physical sensation. It was the draining of my will, my hope, my very essence. My memories of purpose, of justice, of the desire to help, they were being siphoned away, replaced by the crunching weight of its despair and my guilt. My life's work, my entire identity, it was being erased, not from the world, but from me. I was becoming as hollow as its empty eye socket.
The final image burned into my consciousness was not the monstrous, distorted doll, but the original. The small, broken thing with the tattered yellow dress and the one good eye. It stood over me in the void, and for the first time, I saw not malice in its gaze, but a profound, unending sadness. The vengeful spirit of a child who was never saved, who was failed by the world, had found its perfect home. It had found someone who felt the guilt that its own tormentor never had. It had found me. The crushing weight of its despair became my own. My guilt was no longer just about Lily, it was about this child too. Another child I couldn't save. It was the perfect, eternal punishment. Not death, but a life sentence in a prison of my own failure. my soul a vessel for a child's unending rage and sorrow. I don't know how long I was in that void. Time had no meaning there. But eventually, the blackness receded, and I found myself back on the cold, damp earth of the clearing. The sun was rising, its weak light filtering through the trees. My body was numb, my mind a hollowed-out cavern. I stood up, my movements stiff and automatic. I was still a detective. I still had a badge. But the man, Miles Corbin, the one who built a wall of logic to keep the darkness out, was gone. The doll had won. It hadn't killed me. It had done something far worse. It had taken the one thing that kept me going, the desperate hope that I could make things right, and replaced it with the cold, hard certainty that I never could. The guilt I had carried for 10 years was no longer a burden. It was now the very foundation of my being, the ghost in my own machine. I walked out of the woods that morning, a shell of a man, leaving the shallow, unmarked grave behind. The doll wasn't with me, not in any physical sense. It didn't need to be. It was inside me now. Its one good eye staring out at the world through my own, a constant, mocking reminder of a promise I could never keep and a child I would never save.
The horrors linger. Thank you so much for watching or listening. By liking and subscribing, you're helping me summon the next chilling tale from the shadows. Join our community of the brave and prepare for what's to come.